This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day. On today's program, retired Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and partner and vice chairman of the global investment firm Carlyle, on today's troubled world and where investment opportunities may lie, including Iran.
If this rotten regime tumbles, and I think there's a 1 in 3 chance the theocracy could fail. If that happens, Iran could come out from under sanctions, and that's a lot of oil hitting the world markets.
Good day and welcome to the 598th in our series of distinguished speaker programs. I'm Harvey Bennett for the Economic Club of Florida. Times of world uncertainty can create economic uncertainty. And our distinguished speaker this month will bridge both and convey how the dangers across the globe have geopolitical implications impacting our financial investments. We're very honored today to welcome Admiral James Stavridis, United States Navy retired. Admiral Stavridis is a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and a partner and vice chairman of Carlyle, one of the world's largest global investment firms, with $477 billion of assets under management. Admiral Stavridis, welcome.
Great to be here, and now I have to add to my resume that I'm the 598th distinguished speaker. You got to be kidding me. That's a lot of speakers, Harvey.
You are in a great company of honors. We've had former Army generals. I think we've had a few admirals in the past, and heads of state, some terrific folks who've blessed us here.
Well, I'm indeed honored to be here, and I'm a native Floridian, so I feel I ought to get extra credit in some capacity. But I was born down in West Palm Beach, so I'm always happy to be in our state's capital and spending time with fellow Floridians.
Well, welcome back to the Sunshine State.
Thank you.
Please tell us a little bit about what you'll be discussing with the Economic Club of Florida today.
What we're going to talk about is the world, and I'm going to be kind of like a sailor on the bridge of a ship, and I'm going to scan the horizon and look at many of the trouble spots in the world, but also some of the opportunities. But in particular, Harvey, I'm going to discuss what's happening in the Middle East, which, of course, ought to concern all of us, with the potential for U.S. strikes against Iran looming. I'm going to talk about the war in Ukraine grinding along in its 4th horrific year and the chances for a peace settlement or at least a ceasefire. I'm going to talk about U.S.-China relations because there's no bigger strategic question than that. And to our wonderful state of Florida, I'm going to look south at Venezuela and also a bit at Cuba. These are two spots where, yes, there are disturbances and concerns, but in all the places I just mentioned, there are real opportunities as well. I'll also look north at the Arctic, try and illuminate why Greenland is important to the United States. Doesn't mean we should send the 82nd Airborne up there to conquer it, but working with the Danes and the Greenlanders makes a lot of sense because of the Arctic. So, Harvey, I'll go through all that in about 20 minutes, and then I'll take another 10 minutes, because it's an economic club, and talk about, okay, Admiral, what are some of the investment implications that come out of this very turbulent geopolitical world? So that's the sketch of the talk. It'll take probably 30 minutes total, and then I should have time for some great Q&A from this distinguished group gathering for the 598th time.
Well, you'll certainly get it, no doubt about that. Admiral, you've had an extraordinary career. You spent 37 years in the Navy, rising to the rank of 4-star Admiral. You were the longest-serving combatant commander in recent U.S. history. You commanded a destroyer squadron and a carrier strike group, both in combat. You've overseen operations in many of the world's hotspots, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria, just to name a few. And at one point, you led the U.S. Southern Command in Miami, overseeing military operations in Latin America. How has your view of the world evolved over those 37 years?
Well, you left out the most important mission any admiral would say, which is piracy. I fought pirates off the coast of Africa, big NATO mission, Somali pirates. But you're absolutely right. What has evolved for me is the way in which the world changed utterly on September 11th. I was in the Pentagon. I was in the side of the building that was struck by the aircraft. I actually glimpsed the airplane as it hit. It hit about 150 feet to my right. And I'm here having this conversation with you because I was up on the fourth deck of the Pentagon, the fourth floor of the Pentagon, and the airplane hit the second floor and, of course, was going down. So I survived. But at that moment, Harvey, what struck me was that everything will change. And what also struck me is the irony of that moment, in that here I was in the Pentagon, in this massive concrete building guarded by the strongest military on earth, in the capital of the richest country on the planet. Was I safe? No. And that's what 9/11 showed me, was that challenges will rise and be sudden, and we need to respond to them in coherent and capable ways. And I'll close with this. We need to respond with our allies. After 9/11, we went to Afghanistan to find and kill Osama bin Laden. It took us years to do so. Our allies came with us. I commanded troops from 50 nations when I commanded that mission in Afghanistan. They fought bravely and well, and they came because we were attacked. And so the twin lessons for me of 9/11 are how suddenly everything can change, and how challenges you don't expect will emerge. And secondly, when those moments come, you're better off if you have allies, partners, and friends.
I know you're going to touch on diplomacy as well in your discussion with the Economic Club in just a few minutes. After your military career, you served as dean of your alma mater, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University in Boston. And there's even more beyond that, but we won't spoil the surprise for our listeners who will have to stay tuned. But the military relies quite a bit on diplomacy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And let's start with the fundamental premise. And I think this is a quote from General Sherman, famously, who said, "War is hell." He also said, I think it was Sherman, "No one hates war like a soldier." And that's true. He meant anyone who's actually seen war in all its hideous ugliness, rape and torture and murder and people killed. Anyone who has seen that hates war. So any of us who serve on active duty, particularly those of us who fought in combat, we all hate war. And so what our hope perennially is that we can arrive at diplomatic solutions to our differences. Sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. But hopefully having a strong military will deter those who would do us harm. And then secondly, our diplomats deserve our support and our gratitude for trying to find ways to avoid the actual occasion of war itself.
Admiral Stavridis, partner and vice chairman of Carlyle, thank you, sir. We're looking forward to hearing your upcoming presentation on 21st Century Geopolitics and Investments.
As number 598, I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Now, here's Chris Spencer, Executive Director of the Florida State Board of Administration, with our formal introduction.
It's my pleasure to introduce someone that I've had the pleasure to know now for the past 2 years, since I've been the Executive Director of the SBA, Admiral James Stavridis, a Florida native and one of the most distinguished military and strategic leaders of our time. Admiral Stavridis served 37 years in the United States Navy, retiring as a 4-star admiral after a career that spanned both combat command and global leadership. He He served as the 16th Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, overseeing operations in Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, the Balkans, and my personal favorite that I'm most interested in, counter-piracy missions off the coast of Africa. Prior to that, he commanded the U.S. Southern Command in Miami, responsible for military operations throughout Latin America, and was the longest-serving combatant commander in recent U.S. history. Following his naval career, he served for 5 years as Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He holds a Ph.D. from the Fletcher School and is a distinguished graduate of both the National and Naval War Colleges and speaks fluent Spanish and French. Admiral Stavridis is also a prolific author, having written 15 books on leadership, risk, security, and global affairs, and he is a Bloomberg opinion columnist and senior military analyst for CNN. Today, he serves as a partner and vice chairman of Carlyle and chair of the board of trustees of the Rockefeller Foundation. Please join me in welcoming a leader, scholar, and strategist, Admiral James Stavridis.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here in Tallahassee. As indicated, I'm a Florida native, born down south in West Palm Beach, and my wife is from Jacksonville, born in Jax. So, of course, we live in Jacksonville now. But as indicated, I work at Carlyle up north in the Washington and New York City areas. So anytime I can come to the capital of my native state and have a chance to talk to a terrific group like this, I'm gonna seize on it. Well, what I'd like to do today, and I'm gonna use a couple of images up here, if you can look up there. I'm gonna be like this sailor. I'm gonna kind of walk us around the world. We're gonna look at the horizon of geopolitics. And in doing that, I'll tease out some investment implications of this very turbulent world. So we're going to kind of move quickly here, and then I'll leave plenty of time for comments or questions as we get along. I'll start here, the Middle East. If you feel like it's on fire, you're correct. It's been on fire for roughly 2, pushing 3 years since the horrific attacks against the state of Israel. And here in Gaza, we see this ongoing challenge as, if you look bottom right, as the Israelis consolidate control and close off the tunnel complexes. As investors, you ought to ask yourself, what are the implications of this ongoing challenge in Gaza? And here, I think we're kind of edging toward an opportunity for a lasting ceasefire. It'll come as a result of some combination of these folks. You recognize Palestinian Authority, you recognize Israel, United Nations will have a role. I think President Trump's new Board of Peace will have a role. Upper left, you don't recognize. That's the flag of the Arab League. And to get a peacekeeping force into Gaza, we're going to need not only the Arab League, but also a couple other countries, and Indonesia has offered 7,000 or 8,000 troops. So here's the point. Gaza, which has been on fire for 2.5 years, I think is headed toward a period of hopefully prolonged ceasefire. That's good news for investors. It means investment in Israel makes more sense. It means investment in general in the region makes more sense. And all of us ought to feel it's a positive humanitarian development that 2.2 million Arabs, Palestinians, are going to see some kind of relief in the situation they've been facing. So that's a bit about one corner of the Middle East. But how about over here? Iran. Here in Iran, there is significant turmoil. It goes back a couple of years ago. You may remember a series of uprisings led by women and girls who really rattled the regime. This was following the murder of a young woman by the inappropriately named morality police of Iran because her hijab, her hair covering, was misaligned. They took her into custody. She was beaten, tortured, and killed. That led to significant instability, but not quite enough to push the regime over. That was several years ago. But I know you recall, about a month ago, another big wave of significant uprising against this rotten theocratic regime in Tehran. So at the moment, there is not one, but two American aircraft carriers just off the coast. There are F-35s, our most advanced fifth-generation aircraft, are flowing into the region. Our biggest strategic bombers are already there on the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. In Pentagon talk, we have set the table for combat operations. So, even as we are gathering here in Tallahassee for this delightful lunch, right now in Geneva, the foreign minister of Iran is meeting with Mr. Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who have no real titles, but they are all around the world kind of negotiating, and we ought to hope they can land this particular negotiation. Because if we do not land the negotiation, I think President Trump is going to strike. Last time he struck, he knocked out, or at least set back, the Iranian nuclear program significantly. I think this time, the target set is on the bottom left of that screen. It'll be Ayatollah Khamenei. Whether that will suddenly change the tenor, whether that will rise up the people of Iran, remains to be seen. I'll close with a cautionary note. Look at the top at that graphic. That's Iran superimposed on a map of the United States. This is a big country. Population 90 million. Think about Iraq. Iraq is half this size with a population of 40 million. That was a very difficult 20 years for the United States. So I hope we don't end up in a long-term conflict here. And this, as investors, is something you should watch closely for two reasons. Number one, if it goes sideways and we end up in an ongoing conflict, the Iranians will respond by closing the Strait of Hormuz. Poof, there goes 30% of the world's oil bottled up for months. And B, they will attack Israel with ballistic missiles, and they'll attack U.S. bases in the region. We will get dragged into this. So you ought to be watching this for the dark end of the spectrum. And then here's a lighter note. You ought to be watching this one, because if this rotten regime tumbles, and I think there's a 1 in 3 chance the theocracy could fail, if that happens, Iran could come out from under sanctions, and that's a lot of oil hitting the world markets. So as investors, you ought to be thinking both of the dark end of the spectrum and positive outcomes. Bottom line, the Middle East. It's kind of a triangle. It's Israel, upper left, our closest ally and partner, true democracy. And then bottom left, it's the Arab world. That's the flag of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. On the right, of course, is the Crown Prince. And it is upper right, Iran. The degree to which Israel and the Arab states can pull toward each other, encouraged by the Trump administration, is the degree to which we can box out Iran and continue to have a positive place for investments. Let's go here. I know you've been following the war in Ukraine. This is where it stands at the moment. Ukraine, free, democratic on the left, Putin on the right. I want to start by dispelling some magical thinking I occasionally hear. Occasionally people say to me, well, Admiral, if only NATO hadn't expanded, Putin would not have invaded. Or, Admiral, if only we had shown more respect to Putin, he wouldn't have invaded. Wrong. Putin is the problem. We call this correctly the war in Ukraine. It's the war of Putin's ego. He wants Ukraine, and he wants it for these reasons. It's huge, again, superimposed on a map of the United States. Look how big Ukraine is. From Raleigh, North Carolina to Toronto, from Washington to Chicago. And it's full of wheat and corn. It's the breadbasket of Europe. And from Putin's perspective, it's got 40 million people. His population is declining. He sees these as subjects. He wants it desperately. What's stopping him? Our world. Sanctions are imperfect, they're leaky, but they are slowing him down. What's really stopped him is right here. It's the indomitable fighting spirit of the Ukrainians, personified by that man. And by the way, that's the last known photograph of Zelensky in a coat and tie. That guy's been in hunting gear for 4 years. I salute him, and you should too. And the weapons that have been provided in roughly equal measure between the United States and Europe. Sanctions, weapons, NATO has helped. And oh, by the way, I always say about Vladimir Putin, he's the greatest salesman in the history of NATO. Look at those two flags. Recognize them? Sweden and Finland. These are two powerful militaries. They deployed under my command in Afghanistan. They didn't have to. They came to fight alongside us and their European partners. Sweden and Finland are turnkey militaries. The day they joined NATO, they brought immediate combat power. The Swedes build one of the best fighter planes in the world, the Gripen. They build frontline diesels. The Finns, a nation of only 5 million, can put an army of 200,000 in the field, trained, equipped, armed, in 30 days. They're like the Israelis. So NATO is part of the pro-Ukrainian perspective. So again, it's sanctions, it's the fighting spirit of the Ukrainians, it's the weapons, it's NATO, but don't count this guy out. Putin, he still has cards to play. He can continue this horrific bombing campaign. He's recruiting mercenaries around the world. Bottom right, those aren't Russians. Those are Chechens. You know where the largest recruiting station for Russia is today? Not in Moscow, not in Vladivostok. It is in just south of here. It's Havana, Cuba. Putin is around the world recruiting mercenaries. He can go after critical infrastructure, the pipelines, the undersea cables, the offshore oil and gas. He can use cyber. These are the flags of Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the Republic of Georgia. He can use cyber to go after the West. He can also deal with miscreants like this. This is Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He's well named, Kim Jong-un. He's unstable, unkind. He's got a strange haircut, which I think is holding him back. But he's provided 30,000 troops to Russia that are now fighting in Ukraine. And here, of course, is Putin's great dream. Putin's dream is alignment with China. Upper right, those are the flags of China and Russia. Bottom right, that's a Chinese frigate and a Russian destroyer. And if I ask you, hey, where do you think that photograph was taken? You would say the North Pacific, right? Russia, China, they're both Pacific powers. Nope. That photograph was taken 3 weeks ago in the Baltic Sea, in the heart of Europe. Putin desperately wants to pull China toward him. So, even as the talented Mr. Witkoff, upper right, his running mate, Jared Kushner, our Secretary of State, our fellow native Floridian, Marco Rubio, they're all working this problem. And alongside the negotiation with Iran, Mr. Witkoff, Jared, and Secretary, I always want to say Senator Rubio, are negotiating with Ukraine. I think the chances of the deal with Iran are very difficult. I think the chances of a deal with Russia, I like those odds better. So as investors, you ought to be watching this one, just as you're watching the negotiations in Iran. What are the investment implications here? Number one, what if there is a deal, probably along the lines you see now, and Russia comes out from under sanctions? What about all that Russian oil hitting the markets? And reconstruction, rebuilding in Ukraine. Think South Korea, 1955, reconstruction. Those are big investment swings. So how does it come out? I don't know, but I think what you see is what you're going to get. And I hate it. I hate it that Putin will end up with that right hand 20%. I hate it. On the other hand, if we do this deal right, the rest of Ukraine, 80% sails on. Free, democratic, path to the European Union. 40 million Ukrainians come to the West. That's not a terrible outcome. And don't forget, Putin's slice of this pie, his 20%, that red part, it's been a battlefield for 4 years. It is full of mines, unexploded ordnance, destroyed infrastructure, broken bridges. That 80%, I think, has a much better future than the 20%. Let's hope that's how it comes out. That's the deal the administration seeks. Let's go to China very quickly. I know you follow this closely. I'll begin with the challenges. U.S. and China, we have a very rich basket of disagreements with China. On the left, fentanyl. At the top, cyber. To the right, big fleet contending with ours. On the far right, that's critical minerals. Bottom right, trade and tariffs. Bottom left, what the heck is that? Yeah, I heard it over here. It's an artificial island. It's being built here, these artificial islands in the South China Sea. China claims the entire South China Sea, that chunk of territory inside the red lines. You know how big that is? That's half the size of the United States of America. China claims all that as territorial seas. Come down to my native Jacksonville, we claim 12 miles off of Ponte Vedra Beach. China claims millions of square miles as territorial waters. And to buttress that preposterous claim, they're building these artificial islands. They've built a huge fleet, 360 ships. Newsflash, Americans, we have the second largest Navy in the world. We have 295. They have 360. They're building 20 ships a year. We're building 5. Do the math. China also has a powerful cyber force. We have an Army, a Navy, a Marine Corps, a Coast Guard, Air Force. We just built a Space Force. Good move. China has all those. You know what else they have? Cyber force. And they have this clown on their team who has nuclear weapons. That's the really bad haircut shot. So that's a pretty rich basket of disagreements, but all that is before we get to our disagreement about Taiwan. You all know the basics of Taiwan, right? It's an island. It's 100 miles off the coast, very difficult seaway. The Taiwan Strait, I've sailed it many, many times, very bad seas. So that's a buffer, a barrier for the Taiwanese. There are 23 million people on that island. Collectively, they've created the 25th largest economics club, 25th largest economy in the world, Taiwan by itself. And I know you know, they are the center of the manufacture of the highest end microchips. TSMC leads that group. That's the good news. Vibrant democracy. Here's the bad news. Their military is still, frankly, kind of 20th century. What do they need to do? They need to recognize that China has options. There's a map, upper right. 100 miles of sea will protect you up to a point. China can, upper left, blockade. Bottom right, China can bombard. Bottom left, China could invade. It would be a very difficult military undertaking. But China has options. So what does Taiwan need to do? It's right there, upper right. Taiwan needs to become that porcupine. By the way, that's not Photoshop. Occasionally, on a Tuesday night, a lion will decide, I think I'll have porcupine for dinner. That's what happens. It doesn't go well for the lion. Taiwan needs to be that porcupine. They need what you see on the left, the cruise missiles, the air defense, the cyber. They can do that. They're a rich country. They can afford to do it. So, Admiral, how does this one come out, U.S., China? Well, upper right, 4 years ago, I wrote a novel, 2034, like the year 2034. The subtitle is A Novel of the Next World War. It's about what a world war between U.S. and China would look like. Hit number 6 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's been published in 22 languages. I say that not to self-aggrandize, but make the point it's topical, whether U.S. and China get to war. Or we could end up like that photo. Look closely at that photo. Obviously, Chinese warship pulling into port. Look upper left. It's a Chinese warship. It's flying a U.S. flag. Why? I can tell you that with absolute certainty because I've done this. Opposite mirror image a couple of hundred times. As a ship captain, when you pull into the port on a peaceful visit, say when I pulled my ship, USS Barry, into any port, we would fly the flag of that country as a sign of respect. Not above your flag, but on the yardarm. That's a peaceful port visit by a Chinese warship to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And look at the crowd. You see that big Chinese flag, your eye is drawn toward it. Look bottom right. They're holding U.S. and Chinese flags. They're being greeted as the ship pulls into port. This is a photograph of a modus vivendi, which is a fancy term for a way of living between the United States and China. Could we find our way to a modus vivendi with China? I think we can. I wrote the book as a cautionary tale, but I think we can and we will get to a state of economic engagement with China that avoids decoupling. We'll know more this year. Why? Because our president, Donald Trump, is going to go to Beijing for a state visit. Wait for that theater. President Trump in the Great Hall of the People. President Trump in the Emperor's Palace. It's going to be quite a few days. And then President Xi is coming to the United States. Those are good things. Let's hope we keep on course. And then fourth and finally, just a word about this world to the south. You see Venezuela there in orange. You see Nicolas Maduro in better days. He's now in a small cell in New York. That's an excellent outcome for that guy. When I was commander of Southern Command, I met with him on several occasions. He was then the vice president to Hugo Chavez. He was big, dumb, spoke very poor Spanish, believe it or not, at least to my ear, and clearly was not the brains of that organization. Now he is correctly in a jail in New York. The question becomes, what happens next down there? We still have a lot of firepower there, although, as you probably know, we pulled out the carrier Ford, which is now where? Off the coast of Iran, right. As the saying goes, what's the president's first question in a crisis? Where are the carriers? So the firepower is still there, but not quite as much. But we are, I think, moving in a reasonable direction here. The president has developed, evidently, a kind of a good relationship, not with that woman, that is Maria Machado, the Nobel Prize winner. President Trump has chosen to align, and I think it's a realpolitik choice. He has aligned the administration with the old regime there, which is led by a woman named Delcy Rodriguez. They're, I think, kind of a holding pattern, eventually being 6 to 12 months. We'll get to elections. I think that woman eventually will become the president of Venezuela. We will have good pipe into Venezuela. And in case you missed this, yesterday, the Secretary of Energy of the United States, Chris Wright, where was he? He was in Caracas, Venezuela. I didn't have that on my bingo card. You know, a cabinet official. And President Trump is talking about going there. Talk about Secret Service nightmare moment. But the point is, here I think the administration has a pretty good chance of landing the airplane, that being articulated as good relationship with Venezuela, a path to democratic elections, Maduro in jail for the rest of his life, and an economic potential opening. So investors, what does it mean? The oil infrastructure of Venezuela is garbage, needs to be rebuilt. Huge investment opportunity. The oil of Venezuela, although it is dirty, difficult to refine, it's oil. Meaning, if Iran's regime flips, if Russia comes back from under sanctions, and if the U.S. lands the plane here, that's a lot of inexpensive energy flowing into markets. Are there winners and losers? Yeah. Texas, maybe not so happy. Florida, we're happy. China, very happy. Sub-Saharan Africa, Sub-Saharan or sub-United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean, all winners with that cheap energy. That's a lot of lift to the global economy. So you ought to be watching this one as well. I can't leave the stage without just saying a word about Greenland. Greenland is important. It's strategically valuable. It's geographically well located. It's huge. By now you know my methodology. Look how big Greenland is on a map of the United States. If I could snap my fingers and own Greenland, I would. And if we could buy it, I would. And by the way, people sometimes say to me when I say, well, we ought to buy Greenland, people say, well, we're the United States of America. We don't have to buy land. Excuse me, what's the history of the United States? We bought our way to where we are. We bought the Louisiana Purchase. That's about a third of the country. We bought the Gadsden Purchase in the Southwest. We bought Alaska, by far our biggest state. Anybody here been to the beautiful U.S. Virgin Islands? Where do we get those? We bought them. We bought them from Denmark 100 years ago. So buying is good. Unfortunately, I don't think the Danes or the Greenlanders want to sell. So what we ought to do is create a modus vivendi, figure out a way that we can get what we want, which is bottom left, radars, bases, all that, which we basically have already, but let's solidify it. But for God's sake, upper right, let's do it with Greenland, with with Greenland, with Denmark, and let's keep, therefore, that alliance intact. I think that's where this one has landed. And then finally, I worry, as you should, and I know you do in all of your businesses, about tariffs, about where are they going. Bottom left, that's Hawley and Smoot. You may recall the Hawley-Smoot tariffs of about 100 years ago. They did not work out well, ultimately. We're still kind of gathering data. We're a year into the Trump tariffs. Watch bottom right, U.S.-China tariffs. They're settling, it seems to me, between 15 and 20%. And upper left, watch the renegotiation of what used to be called NAFTA. Now it's called the USMCA. It's the treaty between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. And whatever you do, never say to a Canadian that they ought to be the 51st state. Please don't do that. I own a home in Canada outside of Halifax. They don't think that's funny. We should get off that rant. All right, so what do you think, Admiral? What are a couple of investment opportunities? What are a couple good bets that come out of all this? Number one, U.S.-China. Do not run screaming away from investing in China. Not yet, anyway. At Carlyle, we have excellent teams on the ground in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Hong Kong, of course. We're looking at valuations. China is investable. Number two, oil. We talked about it through the presentation. What if that trifecta happens? Iran regime change, Venezuela certainly looking like regime change is a de facto, and number three, Russia comes back. What happens? How does oil repipe? Big investment implications. Number three, the Arctic. Hello, the Arctic is big business. And, I'm not going to debate global warming or climatology with you. I'm not a scientist, but I'm a mariner. I have sailed the waters of the Arctic and the Antarctic, and indisputably, the ice is melting. So we can debate why that is and how fast it's going to happen. The ice is melting massively. What does that mean to investment? It means those trade routes open up. It means oil and gas becomes accessible. And it means you have a geopolitical tension in the high north, because half of the Arctic Sea is Russia. Who's on the other half? NATO. It's the United States, Canada, Denmark by virtue of Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. 7 Arctic countries. So ice melting, oil and gas opening, fisheries, all of it in the middle of a thunderdome. That's good investing. Number 4, I wish this weren't true, but it simply is. Defense is going to be a good investment. Defense spending is going up like a rocket. 3 weeks ago, President Trump, who has a tendency to say flamboyant things, shall we say, he said something very flamboyant that kind of nobody noticed. President Trump said his intention is to raise the U.S. defense budget from its current astronomical figure of $900 billion, raise it to $1.5 trillion. That is investment. If all that capital, or some portion, I don't think he can get that big a raise through Congress, but all that capital goes against defense spending, going to be pretty good investments. And as investors, this is where you want to be. Upper right, that's an unmanned aircraft flying off an aircraft carrier. Bottom right, military AI. Bottom, every manner of unmanned vehicles. Navy SEAL, Trident, Special Forces. In the center, hypersonics, cruise missiles that go at 10 times the speed of sound. And of course, satellites. All that is going to be pretty good investment. Now, you will not get out of this room alive with the Admiral until I show you a picture of a ship. That's an Arleigh Burke destroyer. I commanded one just like it. I put her here to remind us our supply chains, our goods, all of it depends on the sea. We must maintain the ability to control the seas. That's where I think a fair amount of that money will end up going. It'll be money well spent. it's also an investment opportunity, anything that touches shipbuilding. Here's one you probably haven't thought of a lot, and that's India. I go to conferences all the time, Davos, Munich Security Conference, Supervilles, everything, all over the world. And we talk all the time at all these conferences. We talk about the European Union, we talk about the United States, we talk about Russia, we talk about China. We never talk about India. Yet India is this massive country, largest on earth by population, 1.4 billion. Their demographics are vertical. They have a strong leader. You can criticize aspects of Prime Minister Modi, but he is a strong and highly respected leader. If you look around the world at legitimate polling of popularity of leaders, he's at the top. Almost 80% approval in a nation of 1.4 billion. That's impressive. And India occupies this sort of neutral type, non-interventionist position. They can work well with China and Russia. They can work well with the United States, European Union, Japan. India is, in my view, a good investment opportunity. I mentioned reconstruction. I'll always point to the Korean Peninsula, destroyed. Look at that satellite photograph on the left. If you had taken that satellite photograph in 1955 at the end of the Korean War, it would be all dark. Look at the bottom. That's the 9th largest economy in the world. It got there through reconstruction. Bottom right, that could happen for Ukraine. And then lastly, biotech. This slide is actually in the deck because my wife told me that every good presentation has a picture of Hugh Jackman. It's biotech. And we talk endlessly in these kind of investment fora about geopolitics and all the challenges. Here's an investment opportunity that is kind of quietly swimming alongside. It's out of the stream of geopolitics in a lot of ways. And on the right, sequencing the human genome. The price of that has fallen like a stone out of the sky. Put all that together, I don't think we're going to have talons coming out of our knuckles anytime soon, but the investment opportunities there are quite good. So I'll close with this one, and then we can open it up for comments or questions. I love this slide. When I did the photo shoot, that's me on the right there. When I did the, don't I wish. Actually, the slide is here because I'm Greek American, and I'm required to have a Greek myth in every presentation. Behold Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus. He offends the gods and is fated to roll a boulder up a mountain, knowing it'll roll back down. It's like many Greek myths, it's a metaphor for our lives. Our lives are right there. We roll the boulder up, the boulder rolls down. We know that's coming. If you ask my boss, my very good friend, my boss, David Rubenstein, what he would tell you about investing, he'd say right there. It is knowing that markets go up, markets come down, opportunities come, opportunities go. At Carlyle, what we try to be is Sisyphus in the sense that we have the resilience, the determination, the grit to put our shoulder to the stone again and again. Be that kind of investor. You'll succeed. Thank you. What a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thank you. All right. Yeah, sure. Please.
Admiral, thank you for a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
I think we all greatly enjoyed that, learned a great deal. In your career in the Navy, what was the most difficult decision you had to make and why?
I'll give you two. One was 9/11, when the airplane hit the Pentagon. So I'm in the Pentagon, on the E ring, the outer ring, and I glimpse the airplane and it hits 150 feet to my right. I'm a one-star admiral, newly selected, very proud of my new stripe, my new star, and boom, the airplane hits the Pentagon. Immediately, there is smoke, fire. We know people are dying. Every instinct for all of us, every Navy person, every sailor, every officer is a trained firefighter. You may or may not know that. The reason is we train everybody to fight fires because on a ship, if you have a fire, it's not like you can walk across the street and wait for the fire department. So we're all trained firefighters. And for me, knowing my shipmates were in there, having no equipment, no firefighting, no protective gear, no hoses, nothing but wall-mounted CO2 funnels. We grabbed those, sprayed them out. The hard decision was walking away and walking down to that field where the true heroes of the day showed up, the first responders. That was a very hard moment. And in my 37 years, I saw my share of combat. That's the closest I came to being killed. And the worst part was knowing 150 of my shipmates were not going to get out of that building alive and deciding to walk away. That was a very hard decision. I think I'll leave it there. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, Admiral, for your perspective today. Two questions. Number one, the United States has lost our ability to really do shipbuilding, and so we're trying to invest in that. So I wonder what you think our chances are. And the corollary to that is, do you think it's smart for us to go to South Korea and have them help build some of our ships? And then the second question is really about NATO, and that is, do you think that NATO has woken up to the fact the German Chancellor just indicated that he thinks that Russia will invade within 3 years. Is NATO prepared in time for that to repulse them?
Thank you. Both great questions. Let me do NATO first. People ask me a lot, who's going to win the war in Ukraine? Is it going to be Russia or is it going to be Ukraine? The answer is, my view, I think Europe is going to win the war for the reason you articulated. The war has turned on the light for Europe. And Vladimir Putin, as I said a moment ago, greatest salesman ever for NATO by threatening the Europeans. And if you're a European, particularly if you're a German or a Pole, you think back on the last 80 years since the end of World War II. Your grandmother, still alive perhaps, watched the Red Army rape its way across Poland and Germany. You watched Russian tanks roll in 1956 into Budapest. You watched 1968, the Prague Spring crushed by the Russians. You watched Gdansk. Russian tanks rolling west have a clarifying effect on the European mind. And I think President Trump helped by simply cutting off the oxygen. And we could debate, should he have done that maybe a little more slowly rather than just cold turkey, but he did it. He made his choice. Europe will rearm. I think they will build a very credible defense industrial base. They will be far less likely to listen to us, to come along with us. That was the essence of the speech Marco Rubio gave a couple of days ago in Munich. He said to the Europeans, wake up, build your own defense, and come along with us. I think 1 and 2 are a given. Number 3, wait and see. The Europeans, I think, are going to create a free trade zone, not with the United States, but with Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea. That's a pretty powerful free trade zone. And guess who will not be invited? Yeah. So we're in the middle of huge changes in the world order, but I think the Europeans, if they come together, will come out of this pretty well. Shipbuilding, here I am hopeful, and I always say hope is not a strategy, but I am hopeful that the Trump administration will, if they get this big defense upgrade, they'll spend a fair amount on our shipbuilding base. And to the question of should South Korea build some of our warships, I think the answer is yes. not the super high end, but we have need for many, many different kinds of warships. Some of them can be built in South Korea, for example, or yards in Europe, for example. That would free up shipbuilding capacity here in the United States, which could then build the high-end nuclear submarines, Aegis cruisers that we need. So let's hope Team Trump follows through, and if we don't, we will not have control and command of the seas, which I think is pretty critical from every dimension. Captain McCarthy, my very good friend.
Yes, sir. Admiral, you mentioned that there could be questions or comments.
Sure.
While there are many questions I could ask and would enjoy asking, I thought it more important that perhaps I give a comment. Let me just tell you a few slight memories and thoughts about our speaker. He was the youngest member of his class at Annapolis. I went at 17. He's a year before me, to give you some idea. In essence, I was trying to think, who in the world are like you? It would be Tiger Woods, or somebody that at age 5 could see an 8-iron.
Some would say it would be Danny DeVito.
But I think back, for instance, when I was at Annapolis, they used to put out a little monthly magazine called The Log. He was a regular opinion writer, and his opinions were about the sea lines of communication, about international security, about where the Navy should be. You've just always been a big thinker, sir, and all of us that got to serve with you, not only did you set the example of how to be a ship officer, what books we should be reading, what academic milestones we should seek, you were just that guy that always could do it better than any of us and did it in a modest way.
Thank you.
And I can just tell you, as somebody that's gotten to watch since I was 17, the country is lucky that there are people like you that dedicate your entire life to the betterment of the United States and to the patriotism that you reflect and the wisdom that you impart. So I stand to salute you on behalf of all of us that got to watch you.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you, Dan. Gosh, isn't that nice? Thank you. Thank you. And I think, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. Way too kind. Well, as the Bard said, our revels now are ended. I'll turn it back over to our leader. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's great to be with my fellow Floridians. Thank you.
You've been listening to retired Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and partner and vice chairman of the global investment firm Carlyle, speaking before the Economic Club of Florida on February 17, 2026 in Tallahassee, Florida. For more information on Carlyle, visit carlyle.com. The Economic Club of Florida promotes interest and enlightenment on important economic, political, and social issues of the day. To learn more, including how to become a member, visit our website at economic-club.com. This program was recorded at the Florida State University Alumni Center in Tallahassee, Florida.